Okay, welcome everyone to a special town hall meeting hosted by the City of Lynchburg. I'm Ted Delaney, Director of the Lynchburg Museum System and Chief Public History Officer for the city. Pat and I will be co-moderating this evening's virtual gathering. Pat, you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pat Bryce. I'm the Director of Academic Advising at Virginia University of Lynchburg. I also serve on the Equity Task Force for Lynchburg City Schools, the Pierce Street Gateway Board, and the Lynchburg Municipal Federal Credit Union.
The purpose of our meeting tonight is to discuss the possible renaming of Fifth Street and more broadly, how Lynchburg can best honor its African-American citizens. We are joined tonight by several special guests. The first is Ramona Battle, a board member of the Legacy Museum of African-American History and the Lynchburg Museum System. She is a retired administrative social worker from New York.
Reverend Dr. Carl B. Hutchison Jr. is the former mayor of the city of Lynchburg. He's the current president of the Lynchburg NAACP, and he's pastor of First Baptist Church, South Lynchburg.
Tom Martin has served as the city planner for the City of Lynchburg's Department of Community Development and serves as the chair of the city's Technical Review Committee, secretary to the Lynchburg Planning Commission, serves as the planning staff representative to City Council. It is a board member of the Fifth Street Community Development Corporation.
Al Elliott is a lifelong resident of the city of Lynchburg and serves as president of the Fifth Street Community Development Corporation. He's also representing Fifth Street Baptist Church tonight.
A general reminder for those watching in the audience, please feel free at any time tonight to submit a question or comment in the chat. It's important to all of us that we hear from you what your thoughts and ideas are on these topics, positive or negative. We appreciate all types of feedback, support, and constructive criticism. We will try to answer questions from the chat throughout the meeting, and there will be time for Q&A at the end.
Let's start the evening's talk with Dr. Hutchison. Reverend Hutchison, can you share with us some of the history of Fifth Street, and help people understand why this is such a special place in local Black history?
Well, Fifth Street thank you for that, first of all, and Josh and all of you for allowing me the opportunity to be here. Fifth Street, of course, historically has been a very strong business sector for African-American businesses. There are places that are no longer on Fifth Street. They have, not that the buildings aren't there, but they have changed. For instance, when I was a teenager, we went to the teenage canteen. That was before Pat's time. She was a little younger. But we'd go there and have soft drinks. There was Reed's Pharmacy. That building is no longer there. It's part of the community funeral home parking lot. There were barber shops. There were attorneys' offices. There were physicians' offices. Just a lot of different kinds of businesses. And of course, there were the funeral homes. Both Hutchison Community and C.V. Wilson Funeral Home which later changed its name and moved to another place.
Tom Martin has served as the city planner for the City of Lynchburg's Department of Community Development and serves as the chair of the city's Technical Review Committee, secretary to the Lynchburg Planning Commission. He serves as the planning staff representative to City Council, and he is a board member of the Fifth Street Community Development Corporation. Mr. Martin, can you talk to us about how Fifth Street is currently designated and how it got that way?
Sure. So as Dr. Hutchison was speaking with us about how vibrant Fifth Street used to be, it also had a period of decline in the really in the 60s when things started to be desegregated, which was definitely a good thing, but it allowed African-American businesses to go elsewhere in the city. And in 1967, the city and the Virginia Department of Transportation started taking some steps, which I believe and really had helped lead to the decline of Fifth Street. In 1967, plans were introduced to actually widen Fourth Street and Fifth Street, and that was really in an attempt to get traffic through to the plaza and around downtown much quicker. Then in the 1970s, the on-street parking was removed from Fifth Street, so there was really no ability for people to park on the street, go in and frequent the businesses that were there. And then in 1994, the city removed the all-street parking exemption. So if you look at the way the parcels are divided up along Fifth Street, you'll see that the majority of them are very small, or taken up by the building. So there's really no place to have all-street parking lots, very similar to downtown. And when that all-street parking exemption was taken away, even if you wanted to open a business on Fifth Street, you couldn't, because you were required to provide all-street parking. Plans to widen Fifth Street and the all-street, the requirement for all-street parking remained for a long time, and really remained in city plans up until 2002, when one of the versions of the comprehensive plan was adopted, and at which time the city said, we will not widen Fifth Street. It's too important to us. And right around 2000, 2002 is when the city really got serious about starting to look at ways to revitalize Fifth Street. You've mentioned the Community Development Corporation. That corporation was really formed by a committee that was appointed by council right around 2000 time frame. And then in February of 2005, we really started looking at preparing a master plan for Fifth Street. And that plan is what has led to the streetscaping improvements that everyone is hopefully thinks is an improvement to the area, and also which has helped bring businesses back to Fifth Street.
Tom, can you elaborate a little more about the idea of an overlay and how Fifth Street is still Fifth Street with the overlay of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard?
Sure. So there's been several instances in which council has considered renaming Fifth Street. The first was back in 1989. I was a senior in high school. They declined to rename the street at that time. In 2005, council decided to rename the Fifth Street Bridge down at between Fifth Street and Memorial to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Bridge. At that time, they decided not to rename the street, but they actually designated Fifth Street and Memorial Avenue as Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Boulevard. So the name of the street did not change, but it actually received kind of this honorary designation. There were some signs put up through the corridor, and if you notice the brick gateway signs at each end of Fifth Street, you will notice it says "Welcome to Fifth Street, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard." So if you'd like, I could talk a little bit about how the street renaming process works.
Sure. And Tom, just for point of clarification, the overlay right now, what are the endpoints? Is it, does it go as far as Fort Early one end and then the other end?
It goes from the John Lynch Bridge all the way out to Fort Early. That is what the designation is. the overlay name, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, tell us more about that renaming process, Tom.
So the city code sets the process for renaming streets within the city. Obviously, it takes city council action. City council can rename streets within the city by resolution, and that can either be done by city council themselves on their own motion, directing staff to start that process, or any person or persons can request a renaming to occur. Obviously, there are requirements for notifying all the property owners that would be affected on the street. We would notify them of what time council was going to consider that. Believe it or not, there's actually no requirement for a public hearing. And when we spoke with council about the process back in February of this year, I think that was one of the reasons council wanted to get more input from the community on the possibility of renaming the street, or what might be a good way to honor our African Americans in the city.
Tom, let me ask you a follow-up to that. Does council have the option of designating a portion of the street, renaming a portion of the street? In other words, they don't have to take what's now the current overlay and rename that entire stretch. Can they pick and choose areas?
Sure. When we spoke with council in February, we gave them really three options. The first option was to just leave the current designation. They could do that, the honorary designation. Council could rename Fifth Street just from what is Fifth Street, John Lynch Bridge, to the Martin Luther King Memorial Bridge, or they could rename both Fifth Street and Memorial Avenue to Martin Luther King Boulevard, or whatever name is chosen. I don't think it would be a good idea to just rename a portion of Fifth Street. So either you should do the entire street or none at all, because that might get confusing if you just rename things. So that's really why, if you were going to just do a portion of it, the Martin Luther King Memorial Bridge would be a good stopping point.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Ms. Banner, what are your thoughts on the renaming project or anything else that we've been discussing so far?
Hey, thank you so much, Pat. First of all, I'd like to thank the city for including me in this wonderful opportunity. And I'd also like to thank the Legacy Museum, specifically my president, Valerie Chambers, for urging me to participate. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the street should be renamed. I just want to focus for a couple of minutes on why the Legacy Museum of African American History came into being. There were about 15 individuals, and it was a very integrated group 20 years ago that came together and decided that there were a lot of African Americans here in Lynchburg and the surrounding areas who other people didn't know about, because there was never an opportunity for them to be presented in terms of their various contributions. And as a result of that, the Legacy Museum of African American History was born. So it's been 20 years of exhibits, programs, partnerships with other local agencies to provide information and encourage pride, and also to look at the dynamics of what has been going on here in the city of Lynchburg, and to make some changes that everybody could feel included and everybody could feel proud of. Over the years, they've displayed and artifacts. They've held several programs. Some of the programs dealt with the business community, education, fraternities, sororities, social clubs, medicine, the Civil War, music, art, music, and sports. It is a very small museum, but it's made large by the stories being shared by all the docents. They believe that our history is your history. The museum seeks to provide information about African Americans so that we can fully embrace the concept of united when we talk about the United States of America. For many years, monuments and special commemorative signs, programs, articles have been proposed and erected in and about Lynchburg to support various majority individual contributions. However, Dr. King was a nationally prominent individual. He believed in nonviolent protest. He was a civil rights activist, and I don't need to tell all of you in the audience exactly who Dr. Martin Luther King was, but he certainly was somebody on a national level, and he represented an inclusive community. He believed in equality for everybody. Some of the monuments, some of the signs, some of the programs have only dealt with a small segment of the community. This would be a way of uniting all of the contributions in a broader sense. If you go across the country, almost every city has a street or a bridge or a monument to Dr. King. I certainly understand both sides of the issue. We're not changing history. We're not denying the importance of Fifth Street. We're not discouraging people for remembering what happened back when. I think this would just be another way of including everybody in the process. Everyone who needs to be recognized would have an opportunity to share their story and have equal representation. One of the things that I was thinking about as I listened to Mr. Martin is, why not rename the bridge, the Rivermont Bridge? Then people wouldn't be able to complain about changing the addresses and how it might affect the businesses as well as individual homeowners. Just a thought. This is a good opportunity for people to give us feedback. I would say that I don't have one answer. I'm sort of fence sitting because I see and understand both sides of the issue. And maybe after everyone makes their presentations tonight, makes suggestions and recommendations, maybe I'll come up with an answer. But at this time, Pat, I'm fence sitting, and I've sort of told you why I'm fence sitting. Thank you.
Mona, thank you. For everybody's benefit, can you just tell us where the Legacy Museum is, and if somebody's interested in visiting, how they can do that?
Oh, sure. The Legacy Museum of African American History is located at 403 Monroe Street here in downtown Lynchburg. We have a website. Our telephone number is 845-3455. We are open by appointment only. Right now, we have a wonderful exhibit dealing with sports. It's called The Development of an Athlete Facing Gender, Race, Community, and Family. And it will be up for at least another year. Because of COVID, we had to close down. And as I said, we're only open by appointment at this point.
Okay, thank you, Ramona. Does anybody else on our panel have any comments? Anybody want to respond to anything that you've heard so far?
I wanted to give Alvin a chance to make his comments, But I would like to remind everybody that Dr. King, of course, being the leader his whole focus was on bringing people and people, races, etc., neighborhoods together. And the one reason that we as a council ultimately named the whole corridor, the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and made it an overlay so that it could bring neighborhoods that were on the Memorial Avenue side, along with the persons who were, or the businesses that were on Fifth Street, bring them at least closer together in that sense. One good thing that happened during that time that I remember, there was a sign dedicated to soldiers in front of E.C. Glass High School. And there were some complaints or concerns by citizens who wanted, who were just, why would you have Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard right there? And our response to that was, well, why is it we don't have that sign polished to the point that you can't even see the names right now? And so somebody did go and polish it, and it looks real nice even today. And that was back in the early 2000s when it happened. Dr. King, when he spoke, he did not speak at the Sportsman Club or at the Elks Rest. He spoke in E.C. Glass High School, which was on the Memorial Avenue side. When Martin III came and dedicated the bridge and dedicated the corridor, he spoke on the Memorial Avenue side. The whole idea and thought process behind that was that Dr. King was about bringing folk together and not separating folk. And of course, not being on council, they have their own decisions that they have to make now.
Reverend Hutchison, we have a question for you in particular in the chat. Christina Del Zingaro is asking if you can speak to the Community Advisory Board for the Community Access Network's request for the street and the address of the Community Health Center to be renamed MLK Boulevard. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I have been on the sort of community board, and Susan has done a great job, as well as the other persons who are at Community Access Network. And I mentioned early on that this was a part of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard overlay, never taking away from 5th Street. When I was at the funeral home full time, at Hutchison Funeral Home, we changed the name or made the name consistent with the overlay and 5th Street, never taking away the integrity of 5th Street, but also not even taking away the integrity of the Memorial Avenue side. And of course, with community access being right there at 5th and Federal and Memorial and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, that's a central point for that particular area.
Okay, thank you. So just as a reminder to all of our audience, please feel free to type in any comments or questions that you might have in the chat. Doesn't have to be a question, it can just be a comment, positive or negative, on anything that you hear. We really want your feedback tonight, so please take advantage of the chat. We'll moderate that through the evening tonight and try to address those with our panelists. Panelists, any other thoughts? Anybody want to respond to anything that you've heard so far?
Sure, if I may. One thing that Miss Battle spoke of that really kind of brought a thought back to me with the Rivermont Bridge is, you know, the 5th Street Bridge was renamed to Martin Luther King Memorial Bridge, yet there's really not a lot special about that bridge. You know, it's a typical VDOT bridge with Jersey barriers. I think at a minimum, you know, possibly we could look at ways to make that more, you know, something worthy of honoring Dr. King, right? Whether it be, I don't know what those improvements would be, but maybe that's something we could look at also, is how to improve the appearance of that bridge. And really, you know, I'm a planner, so I think about these things, and really, you know, some things that Dr. Hutchison talked about is connecting the two communities. That bridge could maybe hope symbolize that in some way. What do the rest of the panelists think about that?
Mr. Elliott, we haven't heard from you tonight. Do you have any thoughts before we get to your specific focus on Fifth Street CDC? Do you have any general thoughts about what you've heard so far?
No, I think the thoughts that have been expressed so far are reflective of what we have discussed with the CDC board. And as indicated, I represent the Fifth Street Baptist Church, and I have addressed this proposal with the leadership of the church. And so far, I think the church has been almost 100% in favor of renaming the corridor Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. We've had a lot of members, and we've lost a lot of members over the past few years who were what I would consider to be some of the last living Fifth Street historians. And in stories that they have passed along over the years, the Fifth Street corridor was not only sort of a hub for business and social activity for Lynchburg residents, even within the African American community throughout the local counties. Lynchburg was the place to go, the place where all the communities came together. And in that lies a rich history for the business and social life of the African American community.
One of the things that we discovered in preparation for this presentation, just in reviewing photos from Fifth Street, is that if you take a look back in history, Fifth Street was neither Black nor white. It was integrated, meaning that there were Black families and businesses, white families and white businesses all along the corridor. It wasn't until the, as Tom was saying, the early 90s, late 90s, when businesses started moving towards Pittman Plaza, the building of the mall, that we saw this deterioration in the inner city. And so as part of history, I think one of the things that all of us agree upon is that all of Lynchburg's history is important.
Right.
And so we are not trying to relegate Fifth Street to one particular area or persons or race or another, because Lynchburg is all inclusive. And what we want to do is to make sure that everyone understands the entire history of Fifth Street. That's more important than anything. And just knowing about the accomplishments, the contributions of African Americans in that, along that corridor and throughout the city is very important. It's very important that we understand our whole entire history here in the city of Lynchburg.
Pat, I tend to agree with what you're saying, even when council in the early 2000s made a decision to go ahead and name the overlay Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. There were three major factions, if my memory serves me correctly. There was one faction who did not want to do anything, don't make any changes at all. There was another faction that included some of my good friends, Dr. James Coleman, the late Garnell Stamps, and Dr. Jerry Falwell, who wanted to just do the Fifth Street part. But then there was another faction, Dr. Caesar Johnson, Mike Gillette, councilmember and former mayor Mike Gillette, Mrs. Mary Payne, and myself, who agreed that we wanted to see the whole corridor named in honor of Dr. King as an overlay, not to change the name of Memorial Avenue and not to change the name of Fifth Street, which it wouldn't even be done now, I don't think, at this point. But those were the factions. Those were the three factions at that time. Tom was a little younger than
excuse me. Tom,
Mr. Martin was much younger than
Tom, I wanted you to contribute some information. Remember, I was a part of the Fifth Street CDC at that time when we were renovating. We started doing the renovations, the 2-year, 3-year project that just literally almost shut Fifth Street down. And one of the things that we were concerned about and we had taken into consideration was the fact of instead of the overlay, if we really did go to renaming Fifth Street, the cost that businesses would have to incur. Can you speak a little bit towards that?
Well, sure. That's obviously one of the factors that has to be considered in making a decision. Obviously, right now the name of the street is still Fifth Street. It has a designation of Martin Luther King Memorial Boulevard. If it's actually renamed, then Fifth Street would be no more. It would go away, and people would need to change their addresses, their checks, their mailing addresses. So there is obviously that factor. And I'm not saying that's a reason not to do it. I'm just saying that is one of the factors that would have to be considered.
All right, thank you, Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Sure, as well as, and again, this is just a small part of it, but we would need to go in and obviously change all the street signs, which it can be done. I don't think that's an enormous cost. So really, I think the biggest cost would be to people that actually have businesses or live on Fifth Street and changing their address. So.
Okay, any other thoughts from our panelists?
I have a thought or maybe a question. In the event there is a name change, is it feasible to have a transition period to where, businesses could continue to use their current letterhead, checks and different things, and then transition to the new name, if that's the case? I don't know how that would affect, the postal service or delivery services and things of that nature.
Well, I would think that the post office would just, they would have a mail forwarding to the new address. So I don't think that's an issue. It's just like when you move, you do a mail forwarding. And then it's just a matter of going in and changing your personal records to the new address. It's kind of like moving without moving, all right?
Right, yeah. That makes sense.
That's why this issue is so difficult to come up with an answer, because there are so many facets to it. You've got the business, you've got the community, you've got, the city, you've tourism, everything would be impacted. Fifth Street is very, very important to preserve. There's history there. And people are always concerned about changing history. This conversation is not really about changing history. It's really to move forward so that we can unify and unite what was to what is. So it's a real difficult discussion to come up with, an answer that everybody's going to be satisfied with. I don't think we're going to be able to get to that point where everybody's needs are on the table and everybody's needs are met in terms of what they would like to see. So it's becoming more and more. The longer I sit here and the more I think about it, the more questions I have about which would be the best way to handle this, what would be the end result.
The director of community access asked the question whether or not which came on the screen, whether or not the businesses have been polled, or I know a survey has been done. That's going to be revealed to council and ultimately to the general public. So I would assume that a number of those business owners have also participated in that survey, as well as a number of just citizens, everyday citizens, because it's about everybody. So I would think I didn't want her question to go unrecognized.
And Dr. Hutchinson, I agree with you 100%. And Al, you can help us with this. The formation, and Tom, you can too, the formation of the Fifth Street Community Development Corporation involved citizens from both the Timbridge Hill side of Fifth Street and the College Hill side of Fifth Street, because ultimately what happens along that corridor affects those two neighborhoods before it affects anyone else in the city. And so even during the formation of the Community Development Corporation, those two neighborhood interests were primary in our conversations. Tom, Al, you want to elaborate a little bit on that? Help me out with that.
So sure, when the plan was prepared, the plan actually covers a 2-block area on either side of Fifth Street. And one of the things that was so important to the plan, one of the goals was, not only connecting neighborhoods, connecting to the downtown, connecting to Rivermont, connecting to Midtown, but also providing for the needs of the residents. Whether it be food, restaurants, services, employment, those types of things. So the plan did look at a much, I won't say, it looked at a bigger area than just Fifth Street proper. Yes.
And at meetings for the Fifth Street Community Development Corporation, we are constantly looking at issues that add to the community on services that would serve the community's interests, the needs of the residents, as well as the businesses. And, we are constantly looking. One thing we've done that has helped in that, we have participated in trying to stabilize some of the buildings along the corridor in the event that they are made usable and are more attractive to those who might consider bringing businesses to the area. So that's been one of our primary concerns.
Well, if I may, Pat, I will say the Fifth Street CDC has been one of the largest supporters of Fifth Street over the years. And, they really have served as advocates for the redevelopment of the corridor. And I can honestly say that without their support and the work that they have done, I do not believe any of the improvements that have been done would have come about. Constantly be willing to talk about the need for that redevelopment, and they're continuing to do that good work.
Thank you all. This has been a really great discussion so far, and I'd also like to give credit to our audience. You all are doing a great job of sharing your comments and your questions. We want you to keep doing that. Keep sending us your feedback in the chat. We are capturing all of this, so even if we do not respond directly, we're capturing it all, we're getting it all, and it will be, of course, be shared with City Council. So we're going to switch gears a little bit right now, and Josh is going to begin showing we have a series of 12 photos of Fifth Street going back to, I think, the 19 teens and 20s. And I'm going to ask the historians on our panel here to help us identify what we're looking at, and in particular, what stands out to you as significant. Maybe it's something that's missing, that's been torn down, or maybe there's a memory attached to what you're seeing. So for those of you who grew up in Lynchburg, who grew up on Fifth Street, who know what we're looking at, help those of us that don't know these old places and spaces, what we're looking at and what's significant about them.
Well, I can name all three of them. I remember all three of them as a boy. Furthest left is Hutchinson Funeral Home, and then coming over to Earl's Cafe and Sandwich Shop, and in between the funeral home and the sandwich shop was a cab stand, a taxi stand, and you can see the taxis parked out in front. Tom Martin pointed out earlier about the various ways that the city and state were talking about widening the street. Well, notice how large those cars are that are parked right there in front of that cafe.
Reverend Hutchison, which block is this exactly? Which block?
That's the 900 block.
So that's what are the cross streets there?
Yeah, Ninth and Polk.
Okay, so we're looking at Polk.
I mean 5th and Polk. I'm sorry, 5th and Polk.
Okay. So this is, I believe this is down maybe between Madison and...
Yeah, that's the bus station.
Yeah, so this is down closer to downtown.
That's right.
Anybody use that bus station? Anybody remember that?
Yes, many times.
Me too.
And there was also a canteen in the bus station where
Right.
after functions on the Fifth Street area, people would stop by to get a meal before going home.
That's Reed's Pharmacy. That's Dr. Harry Reed, who was a local pharmacist during that day and time.
So where was his pharmacy exactly?
That was also in the 900 block. It is now part of a parking lot, actually. And right near the building, next to the building where community funeral home is.
One thing that strikes me when I see this is that it reminds me that Fifth Street offered almost everything for the Black community that was offered for the white community on Main Street. So the variety of businesses that were offered there is really impressive to me. Between doctors and lawyers and pharmacists, food, entertainment. I mean, it's all there. And this just shows you that every business was covered there. This, I think, is farther up, maybe where Park Avenue comes out. I think Park Avenue was going to come in on the right. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I think Al knows what that building, that tall building is.
It looks like the church.
That's Fifth Street Baptist Church.
Yeah, there's Fifth Street, and the other side would be Monroe, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the corner?
At the corner was Green's barber shop. Right on that corner. And next to that was the pharmacy. It later became, when the pharmacy closed, IB's restaurant actually was located there.
One thing,
and then you see the coal company to the left of Fifth Street Church.
Right.
I'm sorry, Reverend Hutchison. I'm going to point out one thing. The building in the center of the photo, the one that has the billboard on the side, that was at one time known as the Manhattan Hotel, which was one of the
that was a man. Yes.
One of the few Green Book locations here in Lynchburg. So you all probably heard of Green Books. There were,
and that was before my time.
yeah. This is going back to the 30s now.
Thank you, Ted.
In any given year, there might be 6 or 8 sites locally. That building there at the center of the Manhattan Hotel was one that was listed as a place for travelers to be able to stop.
And that's it, I think you can see the sign. And my father's standing up in the left corner.
Are you in that photo, Reverend Hutchinson?
No, I was a little too young, Tom.
So that building is no longer there. Where exactly was that building?
Notice something. I think we need to be aware of something. Notice there's nothing but men in that picture.
Right.
No ladies in that picture. Because back then, there were very few ladies who worked in funeral service.
Right.
Very few. Only in more recent times have ladies really become interested and who have assumed leadership roles in funeral homes.
And which block is this? I'm not sure I recognize this one.
This is the block of where Jericho Baptist Missionary Church is.
That's
Wilson's Barber Shop. The pastry shop was formerly Bill's Pastry Shop.
That's the historic building on the corner of Fifth and Mass.
Right.
Yeah, that's the old Norval Tavern.
That's right.
I love this photo because it reminds me that Fifth Street was residential at one point. It hasn't always been the commercial district that we know it today. People actually live there, and this really suggests that to me.
In the promo pictures you had Mrs. Maloney's picture, where her first husband, Dr. Whedon, that was his office building right up here, to the right, sort of to the right, that you can see the full building. And also C.V. Wilson Funeral Home was also in that block. And notice those cars again. Those are some large cars.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great photo. I'm not sure that I know the location. Does this look familiar to anybody?
Seems to be in front of the drugstore with the barbershop right next door, which is right next door. That was the Haskins barbershop. Julius Haskins' father and uncle worked in that barbershop.
Now
That's the 900 block, and of course Harrison Theater is in that block as well, and that was a lot of kids. As kids, we used to go to the Harrison Theater. Mr. Lorenzo Fells was the manager of that theater.
Yeah, the large structure that the Harrison Theater has been demolished, but
Right.
That's a place most people remember before it was demolished. A lot of people went there for movies. And of course, in the era of segregation, this was a place where African Americans could attend and did not have to suffer the indignity of going to a side entrance or having to go to a balcony. It was definitely a change from some places down on Main Street.
Right. John Hughes III reminded us that that lady with those children was Mrs. Maggie Dennis, taking them to Sunday school. I guess they went by the drugstore and got a soft drink before, they used to have root beer floats at the drugstore. I can remember. Yeah, the brown cow, that's what it's called. You're right, John.
What was the brown cow? Was that something
that was that wheat beer float. Yes.
So this is the interior of a cafe. We couldn't quite tell where this was. Does this look familiar?
Just not sure which one.
I think this is down near the roundabout, right at the corner of Federal, I think.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's a short, very excerpted, brief photographic history of Fifth Street.
Right.
Thank you all for your comments on that. I'm going to share a few slides myself now. We're going to shift our program to talk more broadly and more generally about how we as a city can honor African-American history and our African-American citizens. So we can still talk about Fifth Street, but we're going to broaden the conversation a little bit.
And we did get one good question about that. Why isn't someone like Aubrey Barber, who has been quite active in our community, especially as it relates to Timbridge Hill and throughout the community, people like that, why aren't they recognized as well? We might want to include that in your discussion.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. So I'm going to show a few slides here, and we're going to talk more generally about not just Fifth Street, but the entire city. So bear with me 1 second. I'm going to switch to some slides. Okay, so I wanted to just give everybody a very brief overview of ways that African-American history is being recognized and honored today in Lynchburg. This is by no means comprehensive. It's by no means, the end all be all. This is just a starting point for conversation, just to make sure that for those maybe who are new to our city or who don't know much about this history, to get an idea of what's already out there. So, of course, Ramona has talked about the Legacy Museum. That's in the upper left. That is Lynchburg's official African-American History Museum. It's now over 20 years old at the corner of 4th and Monroe Streets. In the lower left, that's the Ann Spencer House on Pierce Street. Ann Spencer is definitely one of the most nationally recognized African-Americans from Lynchburg. She was a poet during the Harlem Renaissance. She was a librarian and a teacher, worked at Dunbar High School for a long time. Her home is a museum. Right now it's only open by appointment, but it's in the 1300 block of Pierce Street, and it's absolutely a place you should visit, not only for the house, but for the garden that's behind it. In the bottom center, that is the Lynchburg Museum, where I work on Port Street. We are the city's history museum. We represent the entire history of the city. So that, of course, includes African-American history. One thing that I remind people often is that for the entire 19th century, so from 1800 to 1900, 50% of the city's population was Black. 50%. Today, it's closer to 25 or 30%. And so we try hard to make sure that the history that we share in our museums for the 19th century reflect that and reflect their contributions and their presence here in our city. The upper right shows you a picture at our sister site, Point of Honor. Point of Honor is the former plantation that's in Daniels Hill off Cabell Street. It's interpreted to the federal periods, so roughly 1815 to 1830. And we are trying more and more to tell the story of the enslaved people who lived and worked there, since they usually often outnumbered the white people that lived there. And you can see we have one interpreter there in our historic recreated kitchen, demonstrating historic cooking techniques. In the bottom right is a picture of Old City Cemetery. Old City Cemetery is located off of Fifth Street. It's not far, it's just 1 block over. It's established in 1806, so it's over 200 years old. And most of Lynchburg's enslaved population is buried there, as well as thousands of African Americans in the era of Reconstruction and Jim Crow, early 20th century, right up to the Civil Rights Movement, when the cemetery was closed. And 2/3 of everybody there, so 2/3 of the roughly 20,000 people buried there are African American. So it is a site of major Black history. And if you haven't been there, please take some time to visit. All over the city, there are interpretive signs and plaques. You all, I'm sure, can think of several. You see at Old City Cemetery, there's a plaque, a large interpretive plaque that talks about specifically the Black history that's there, highlights some of the people, some of the notable people. Upper right, that's a picture of Riverside Park, looking at what was a public pool that was filled in the early 1960s rather than integrate. And there is some interpretive signage there now at the pool that tells that story and reminds people that it was filled in rather than allowing citizens and children to integrate in the pool. In the bottom right is a memorial that is at Riverside Park also. This is at the tennis courts and acknowledges Dr. Walter Johnson's contributions to tennis in the city and the times that he played there. There also, interestingly, is a parallel marker that's at his home tennis courts on Pierce Street. So there's a very similar one at his home and his home tennis court on Pierce Street. And the bottom left is some memorial plaques that are on the campus of what's now Dunbar Middle School. This, of course, honors the site where the old Dunbar High School was. Dunbar High School was Lynchburg's African-American high school in the era of Jim Crow and before integration. The building has been torn down, but the markers here designate the site, they honor it. There's a wall of a memorial wall you see there at the back right. Lots of interesting plaques and things that you can learn on those grounds there. There are a number of Virginia historical highway markers all through our city. There are total now, it's actually over 61 now. The brochure that you see was printed a year or two ago, so it's now a little bit out of date. There are now closer to 67 or 68 markers. And they include a really surprising number of African-American stories and people and places. And you just see a couple of samples there. Dunbar High School, Court Street Baptist Church. In the bottom right is a brand new marker for Dr. Augustus Lushington, who was Lynchburg's first African-American veterinarian. He was a native of Trinidad in the Caribbean and moved here in about 1900 and worked in that little building that's still standing there beside Fifth Street Baptist Church on Fifth Street. And that's where that marker is. The brochure that's pictured there on the left, this is available all over town. It's got the texts of all of the markers here in Lynchburg, all 61 at that time, with pictures and images to go with each one. So if you haven't picked that up, please look for that. It's in lots of places around town. And then also just look for them as you drive around because these markers are all over. There are several, what I would consider major public events and programs that are really focused on African-American history. So on the left, you see a poster there for the Pierce Street Harlem Renaissance Festival. That was held every fall on Pierce Street. They would close the block, the 1300 block, or maybe 13 and 1400 block. They haven't been able to do that for the past couple of years, but hopefully that will pick back up again. Look for that. That's a really special, interesting event that ties together all the different great history that's on Pierce Street. On the right, that's a picture from Juneteenth, which is celebrated now annually at Miller Park. And I understand you all maybe can confirm that it is going to happen this summer. It's going to be virtual this year, and then hopefully in 2022 we'll go back to being in person. But right. Of course, this is a day that commemorates when the very last enslaved African Americans in the country were told that the Civil War was over and that they were emancipated and they were now free. And that happened on June 19th, 1865 in Texas. And even in Lynchburg, in the first couple of years after the Civil War, local Black residents celebrated something called Emancipation Day. And it was a very similar event to celebrate the coming of emancipation for all enslaved people. And it's wonderful that this event is still carried on locally today here. This is in Miller Park about 2 years ago. This is a really special photograph that is in the collection now of the Library of Congress in Washington. It is the only known photograph of an enslaved Lynchburg person taken during slavery, so before the Civil War, that is also identified. So this was a woman named Mary Bryce. She was enslaved and worked at Point of Honor, the former plantation that I mentioned earlier. We don't exactly know much about her life. We don't know exactly what she did. She was likely, she was likely a domestic servant and was therefore photographed by the family that owned Point of Honor at the time. But this is really incredible to have an enslaved Lynchburg resident, someone who lived in our community, who is named, identified, and then photographed. This is from about 1853. And the reason I'm showing this is that we are in the process now of installing a mural that's going to honor Mary Bryce. It's going to be on the Blackwater Creek Trail near Point of Honor at the foot of Cabell Street, where Cabell Street meets the Blackwater Creek Trail. So this is coming. You'll hear more about this. You'll see her face. You'll see her effigy in this mural, and should draw attention to that really important history, not only at Point of Honor, but also our entire city. And I want to close with this one reminder that the only statuary in the city of Lynchburg for an African-American person is this bust right here. You all recognize where this is?
Mm-hmm.
This is the grounds of what's now Virginia University of Lynchburg.
Mhm.
This is a marble bust of Gregory Willis Hayes, who was the school's second president and who established the philosophy of self-help and excellence in its academic institution that's still carried on today. This is really unusual and special that it survived all these years. This will be a good segue into the conversation that we have about Mayor Thornhill. But I just wanted to remind everybody that on the campus of the school, there is this bust of someone who was in our community, who was a leader locally and nationally. But he's the only one. Right now, he's the only one in our city. Does anybody have any questions about that before we open it up to the panel? Anything that they saw, anything you want to add to?
I did want to make mention, Ted, of young African-American artists that are contributing to the history of Lynchburg, the mural along Fort Avenue that was created by Michelin Hall. Sometimes in reviewing some of the information we received, people were asking about African-American contributions to the city. And there are a lot of contributions that have been made. One thing that most people, or a lot of people, don't know about is that there is an African-American heritage trail. So when we talk about ways to honor prominent Black people in the city, there's always that avenue that we could use throughout neighborhoods. If we could ask for artists to offer renditions, or Ted just mentioned, there's only one piece of statuary of a prominent Black person in the whole entire city of Lynchburg. So there's room for our artists to contribute. I think that'll lead us into the next portion of our conversation, if we're ready to go there, with Al. In talking about the Fifth Street Roundabout, can you update us on the statue of the former mayor, T.D. Thornhill, and where we are with that?
Okay, yes. Currently, we've run into many obstacles. Primarily, our sculptor, Ken Ferroni, encountered a lot of health issues that halted the project for a while. He's currently recovering, and to a certain extent has recovered. He's begun working on the statue again. He's working from a private studio now, and hopefully, I talked with him earlier this week, and he's planning to be back at work full time, hopefully within the next 2 to 4 weeks. He had to basically isolate for a year, a little over a year, because of health and the pandemic. So his health compromised his immune system. So he really had to isolate more so than the general population. He's currently able to resume work. He has a minor health condition now that would delay it about 2 weeks, but hopefully he'll be at it full time, according to his last indication, in working on the statue.
Mr. Elliott, you asked about funding. Do you have all of the funding that you need for the sculptor to finish that project?
Yes, we have enough funding to meet the cost he gave us for completion of the statue. once the statue is completed, though, we will have to raise funding for a base and all that goes with that in the roundabout. But as far as the physical statue, right now as it stands, we are fully funded for that.
Great. And am I correct that this is a project of the Fifth Street CDC, right? Are you all the official sponsors?
Yes, we are. We have primarily been the sponsors of the project, but the project is the result of the desires of the community and many donors. We've had, I know we had at least one charrette to get public opinion, public input on who should be recognized and things of that nature. And Mayor Thornhill was the final selection for that. Due to his involvement in the community, he was not only a mentor to a lot of people within the African American community, but he was also kind of a conduit for the interests of the Black community to city council and other governing bodies within the city. So he played a vital role in expressing the needs and desires of those within the African American community, and was a very vocal advocate for the interests of the African American community.
Mr. Elliott, Councilman Wilder was asked in the chat if there's an estimated completion date for the statue once Mr. Ferroni can begin work, maybe later this year.
Well, we're hoping, if I recall correctly, barring no more delays, that the earliest it would either be in late spring or summer of 2022.
Right. Just to clarify, the picture that's being shown, the image there is a rendering of just a conceptual idea of what public art might look like in the roundabout. That's not necessarily what the Thornhill statue will look like. I think it's, if I understand, am I correct? It's life size, and then it will be, his life size statue on some sort of a stone base. Is that the vision?
No, it's actually 1.5 life. The statue would be approximately 9 feet tall, so 1.5 life size. And
now I can talk a little bit about the base if you like.
Okay, yes, please.
So the current thought for the base would be to rise up from the apron level at the roundabout up about 3 feet with a landscaped area, and then about another 3 feet of stone base. And then on top of that would be the 9-foot statue. So overall height from Fifth Street would be about 15 feet. And really the reason a statue was shown here is because roundabouts are just a great place for the display of public art, and it's really a prominent location in the Fifth Street corridor.
So a question for Al and maybe for Elise as well. If people in the audience are interested in supporting this project, how can they get in touch with the Fifth Street CDC? How can they maybe even financially support this project?
So we have a CDC website, and there is a link there to make donations. We have a post office box, PO box. Well, I won't quote that right now. I don't have it right here with me. But the information regarding donation can be gotten from our website.
There's also a Facebook page for the group where you're welcome to reach out. And also on the Facebook page, we've been posting recently, some Fifth Street history, and that's something that the group does regularly too. So if you want more images like the ones you've seen tonight, we have those posted regularly on the Fifth Street CDC page as well.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you. Welcome, Elise. Elise is another member of the Fifth Street CDC.
One of the questions I wanted to address that I saw pop up in the chat was how much the city charged. The city didn't charge anything. Those funds were raised privately. Those were from donations from the public, and that was a caveat as part of what we were doing, so that we did not impose costs upon the city as part of the CDC. We were trying to fund as many of our projects as possible. Also, if you look around, if you ever have the chance to walk down Fifth Street and walk around, those are history tables that are located in the four corners of the roundabout, and it would behoove you to take the time to stop and look at those. A lot of thought and a lot of planning went into it because we wanted to make sure that everyone was educated about the historic relevant facts of the history of Fifth Street, and it is all inclusive.
Has there been any discussion? Has there been any discussion? We got a question earlier about other citizens being recognized. Has there been any discussion about other maybe smaller statues or some other type of marker around the roundabout, which would recognize those persons as well? I guess Alvin might be able to comment. Alvin and Tom might be able to.
So far, officially, just the information panels that Patty alluded to. Those have been used to represent people and events that have contributed to the Fifth Street area.
Yeah, Al, I do recall a discussion at some point about the possibility of doing, the large statue in the center, but maybe something smaller in the corners, in addition to the history tables. And, Mr. Delaney, I'm not sure if you could put that image back up of the statue, but the entire design of Fifth Street in that area was intended for that to become what planners call a public room, really a gathering place. So if you go up there and you look at the four areas of the plaza, those walls are designed to be seating walls so people can sit and come and reflect and look at the history tables, look at the statue when it gets constructed. So I don't think anything's out of the question for those plaza areas. I think that's something we could look at moving forward. But I think right now the CDC's focus is to try and get that statue of Mayor Thornhill completed.
Tom, I also remember a conversation that we had, and it did come up about Carl's point. What about statues of other people? And one of the things that we talked about was that we didn't want to relegate Black history only to Fifth Street, because there's so much more that people have contributed throughout the city. Suppose we didn't do anything with Ann Spencer's house or Dr. Johnson's house, or suppose we didn't acknowledge any other prominent people or people of color throughout the city, in other places throughout the city. It was not only Fifth Street. Black people have contributed all over the city of Lynchburg. So why should we relegate ourselves to one particular area?
Well, I think you bring up a very, very good point. I don't think that Fifth Street has to be the only area. And a few years back, the city put in place what's called a public art policy that allows for the display of public art, which includes things like murals and statues and the history tables, to be able to go on city property and city right away. So at the time, the city, we obviously can't go through and fund all the public art that's needed, but we wanted to be facilitators of it, and that's why we started this process to allow the display on public rights of way, and that's really why I think you're starting to see more public art out in the city.
Just a quick reminder to everybody to continue to make comments in the chat, ask questions, tell us your thoughts and ideas. This is really valuable and meaningful to us, and whether it's positive, negative, constructive criticism, support, amplifying somebody else, please continue to share your thoughts, and we'll try to answer questions as they come in. But this is all of this is being captured. Any other thoughts from our panelists about trying to honor African-American history beyond 5th Street? Anybody have any ideas for how to have more impact in other places? Is there something obvious we're not thinking of?
I think one of the things we maybe have sort of overlooked is the beautiful depiction by Anne Vandergraaf of those persons who, across the African-American community, made contributions to our city. And that, no matter how long, is just a great pictorial, not done by someone local, but by a South African artist who made Lynchburg her home. And it's a great portrayal.
That is a really incredible piece of art, and I would encourage everybody to go see it in person at the Legacy Museum. It's front and center when you walk in. It's a triptych that depicts all of the people involved in the civil rights movement here in Lynchburg, and it's really special. So please see that if you can. Councilman Wilder has asked in the chat about how many historic markers are of African Americans. In Lynchburg, again, of the 67 or 68 that we have right now, about a quarter of them are for African Americans. What's interesting is that in the state of Virginia, Lynchburg actually has the highest percentage of diversity in its markers, even more than Richmond, more than places in Northern Virginia, in terms of how many of these state markers are representing African Americans, women, other minority groups. But there's still a long ways to go because it's only 60 or 70 markers for all 250 years of history of the city. So there's more to be done there, but right now it's about a quarter.
Ted, are all the markers representing the achievements of local African Americans, are they in the area in which they resided or where they worked or they owned a business?
Yeah,
they're not throughout the city. They're in certain segments of the city. Am I right?
That's right. The state prefers that the markers go at the person's residence. So most of them are going to be at their homes. But in the case of Amelia Pride, whose home is demolished, the marker is now on Pierce Street, where she had her old folks' retirement home called the Dorchester Home. So in some cases, it's where they work. But you're right. Most of these are concentrated downtown. The Luke Jordan marker, you all may recognize down on Jefferson Street.
Yeah, so on Jefferson.
And then they go, through all the downtown neighborhoods.
Okay.
There's one out on the campus of Oakwood Country Club for Morris Alexander, who is a nationally recognized caddy master. That might be the farthest one from downtown. Ramona, we have a few more slides that we prepared that are about the Legacy Museum, and it showcase in particular some of the brochures that you all have put together and some of the exhibits that you've highlighted. We'll show those, and if you want to add any comments, please feel free.
Sure. Okay, the one on the left, Minding Our Own Business, that was from 1820 to 1970. That was one of our earlier exhibits. There's several pages, a lot of information in there. And I believe in the middle of the booklet, it actually has the date and the location of each one of the businesses that were housed on 5th Street. The brochure in the middle, Explore Our Legacy, is a guide to African American heritage. And so that would be the local sites that everybody has talked about. The museums, both museums, Old City Cemetery, etc. And there are some wonderful pictures in there, and it gives you a little history about the legacy of African Americans. Also deals with the trail, the Black History Trail, Blackwater Creek. And then, of course, the one on your right is the historic markers of Lynchburg, which you just discussed. And it has some very good stories in there. Most people are not aware of that history, and it's very, very informative and interesting. A lot of people live in this city, and they may know some pieces of the history, but they don't know, well, no one knows everything. But there's so much more that's very exciting in the retelling of it. This was a project of the legacy called Trailblazers. They were the first. We went through and worked with a number of other people to come up with the names of individuals who actually were first in their particular profession. And so when you go through each page, be the picture, what they did, whether or not they're still alive, and what they're currently doing. This took us quite a long time, and we had a partnership with several other organizations and individuals to pull it together. So please come by. Here's some more. These are brochures representing each and every one of our exhibits. The one on the left was the one about medicine. It was struggle, sacrifice, and scholarship. It was education. Very, very interesting information. The picture on the front are some young people who were at Darrington at the time. The second brochure is much in demand. That was 300 years of Central Virginia African Americans in the military. Again, a wonderful exhibit, lots of information. People came in, they didn't even know that we had some of the artifacts from the time that their father or grandfather or great-grandfather were in the military. The one in the middle is the latest exhibit, and that's the development of an athlete. That's the one that I mentioned earlier that's still up. We have some wonderful artifacts there, really good information, people who've passed on, people who are currently playing professional sports, and some people who left the arena of professional sports, whether coaching or teaching. The next brochure is Someday, the Fall of Jim Crow in Central Virginia from 1954 to 1981. Again, a lot of wonderful information about that period of time. The last one on the right was the Rhythm of Yesterday and Today. That was our music exhibit, which was, again, certainly just a wealth of great information about some of the, just the inspiring stories of musicians and vocalists from, I believe it was the beginning of the century until 2017. There was a lot of information, a lot of artifacts that were loaned to us, and we had a lot of people calling and taking pictures and just coming and talking and remembering some of the rich history that they had heard from their parents or their grandparents, et cetera. So please, we're not open to the public. You can make an appointment and come in and see our exhibit at any time. But just want to remind you that the Lynchburg community has supported the Legacy Museum for the last 20 years because this group of people who were the founders felt that it was important to preserve the legacy and the rich history of African Americans. And there had not been another opportunity for that to happen. So that is one of the reasons why the Legacy Museum is so very, very important. We don't just stay with one subject matter. We have an exhibit committee and we talk about what we think the community would like to hear about or know more information. We also hire professional curators to come in and to do the research and to actually mount the exhibit. So it's very exciting for us because as we're going through the process, we learn a lot about the history, about the particular institution that we're going to be exhibiting. And we also learn to partner with Old City Cemetery, the Lynchburg Museum, et cetera. A couple of museums in Richmond, certainly the Smithsonian in Washington. So please come and go on our website. We have some very good information there. And within 2 or 3 months, we will be able to have you go through a virtual tour of the museum. Call us. We're open Wednesday through Friday. You can leave us a message even though we're not there, or you can certainly reach out to the chat and leave us information that way as well. We also have a Facebook, Friends of the Legacy. So we have many different ways that you can contact us. And we're just very excited to be a part of this process. As I said early, it's a lot of information and it's an emotional history that you don't want to lose sight of. It's information that so many people have lived through. I have not lived here that long, but certainly my family goes back 5 generations. And so this is a lot of very meaningful information for all of us. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ramona. We're nearing the end of our time here tonight, but do any panelists have any final thoughts or final questions, anything else we feel like we didn't get to cover, anything you want to share?
Ted, the one thing I'd like to add is that, when you're talking about Black history, a lot of the photographs that we looked at, they were buildings that were torn down.
Yes.
So a lot of the history relative to buildings or places in the Black community no longer exist. And so we're dependent upon the descendants of people in our community to tell the story, to help tell the story, working in partnership with Lynchburg City Museum, city government, churches, the Legacy Museum. There are lots of places around town that we can tell you about, but they no longer exist. I shared with Ted, for instance, that the civil rights movement was born was Pat Walker on 12th Street. And one of the things that came up during the conversation or just in their discussions was a comment was made about Martin Luther King only coming to the city once to speak at EC Glass. And that's so very untrue. Right. He was an integral part in helping to shape the civil rights movement in the city of Lynchburg. And we have to remember that during that period of time, we couldn't tell people, members of the Black community couldn't tell you when people like that were in town for fear of his life. And so he was here several times in Lynchburg, helping to put together the civil rights movement and helping Black people to mobilize and do those things. There are other people that were involved in that movement as well. Carl, you may be able to share some information about things that we know or don't know. Dr. Virgil Wood played an integral part and it still comes to the city from time to time. His protege, Dr. Owen Cardwell, recently relocated to the city and can share information with us. There are tons of people around that can tell the story of the Black history of Lynchburg, Virginia. It's just that we have not come together, and that's what we have to do. We have to come together to educate our entire community. Our history is rich. Right. It's still going on. And right. So we encourage you to keep adding comments, asking questions, creating more public-private partnerships so that we can showcase the beauty and the elegance of history of Lynchburg.
Yeah, well said, Pat. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight. Thank you all so much for making time to do this. This is really important for us to share what we know and also to listen to our community. Just so everybody knows, this recording and the transcript of the chat will go to City Council for review, along with the compiled results of the online survey that was posted a few weeks ago on the city's website. City Council will then review all of this information and create a course of action later this year. So we thank all of you all for joining us tonight. Please continue to send thoughts and comments and feedback. And thank you again. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.